What's up everyone? So today I'm going to be doing something a little bit different. It's going to be a meta discussion, but not really about any specific type or Pokemon. It's just kind of my views on the Crown Tundra as a whole, my first impressions if you will. So just a bit of forewarning, this discussion is maybe slightly veering on the rant end of discussions because I'm not the best impressed with the Crown Tundra right off the bat. Now, that said, I do think the meta definitely has wiggle room to change. I think it's not going to always remain this bad, but at the moment, I'm just not enjoying it. So, this is also going to be maybe a small bit of a channel update. So, I'm not going to be releasing any videos on like Monotype showcases for the next couple of weeks while I wait for the meta to settle. And the reason I'm deciding to do this is because I don't think the meta is in a spot it's going to stay in for a long time right now, and I think any Monotype videos I release will age kind of poorly. This video may also age poorly, I will admit. Maybe in time I'll decide that, oh, I actually love the meta, it's fantastic, but at the moment it's just not for me. Now, that said, I'm not saying the meta is bad or you're not allowed to enjoy it. Absolutely, everyone is entitled to their own opinions. And if you do disagree with me, if you agree with some of my points, or if you agree with me completely, definitely let me know in the comments below. Let's open a discussion of why you disagree with me, or why you agree with me, or what changes do you think could be made to the Monotype meta to make it better. I'm happy to listen to these things. So I'm going to jump right into some Pokemon I think, in my personal opinion, just do not belong in the Monotype meta right now. And my reason for this is I just think they are fairly overwhelming against a lot of the weaker types in the tier, and their types they exist on anyway are pretty good. So we're going to start off with Magearna. Now, Magearna is recently unbanned, and actually I must say, just in case, at the time of recording this video, these Pokemon are not banned to the best of my knowledge, but they might be by the time it's up, so, or by the time you're watching this, so please don't go in the comments and like, oh, this is banned, you should know this, because at the time of recording, these were not banned. So, first up we have Magearna. So, why I think Magearna is a bit too good for the Monotype meta. First of all, I think Steel Fairy is one of the best type combinations in the game. It's only weak to Ground and Fire, which are two granted fairly common offensive types, but there are some types out there that won't be able to run so much of those coverages. For example, moveset wise, it gets things like Shift Gear and Calm Mind, which I think is called Double Dance, or something people call it, which is just so overwhelming for so much of the tier. There's very little that can easily swap in on this unless you're like a steel type, for example. Not every type has access to steel types. On top of that, it has a draining case for fantastic longevity. While it's not that strong, it's only 50 base, it recovers 75% of the damage dealt, which is a ton, especially because we can become stronger with Calm Mind and our Soul Heart ability. So what Soul Heart lets us do is get a special attack increase every time a Pokemon faints on the field. So Magearna doesn't even have to be responsible for this KO. It could be a KO from Toxic Chip, it could be a KO from Hazards, it could be a KO from Recoil. All of these still count for Magearna getting a special attack increase, so it's kind of like a special Moxie, but just strictly better, in my opinion. And stat spread wise, it's pretty nice. It's quite bulky at 115 defense and special defense respectively. HP is pretty okay too. On top of that, it has fantastic special attack. Now, its speed doesn't look the best right off the bat. It's only base 65, but Shift Gear doubles that speed, so it can become quite overwhelming quite quickly. On top of that, it has great team support. If you're on a steel team, there's the plethora of flying types like Corviknight, Skarmory, Celesteela. All of those you can easily swap into to ease a ground move. On top of that, now Heatran is back, so we don't even have to worry too much about fire attacks anymore, as long as you can keep your Heatran alive to swap into. And for a second move, you can run things like Aura Sphere, you can run Flash Cannon, you can run Iron Head if you want to make use of your attack increases and not be walled up by specially defensive tanks. I think it has Fluor Cannon as well, if you want to just go for an all-in-out wall breaker. Energy Ball if you're worried about those ground types. This thing's move pool is quite expansive, so in my opinion, I do think it is a bit overwhelming for the type. Next up we have Kyurem Black. So Kyurem Black was banned at the end of the pre-first DLC wave, quite close to the DLC, and there was contention over it because people were saying like it shouldn't be banned because the DLC is going to come out, but I agreed with the logic of the council for banning it, and they were saying we shouldn't take into account what is going to come back in the what's going to come back in the DLC, what's going to be added to the DLC. We should ban it in the here and now. So Kyurem Black is back because you might be wondering, a lot of these Pokemon were previously banned, but we decided, or the Monotype Council, I believe, decided to unban a lot of threats and see what their place is in the meta right now, which is kind of one of the reasons I'm not liking the meta at the moment, but that's kind of my own issue. So back to the topic at hand, Kyurem Black. Kyurem Black, I do think, is a bit overwhelming, and I'm definitely a bit more lenient on it than I was originally. Originally, I was vehemently against Kyurem Black being in Monotype. I thought it was way too good, and now I've loosened a bit on that, though I do still think Kyurem Black is a little on the strong side for the tier. So the reason I think this, and it's not just, oh, it has 170 base attack, that's really high, that's really good. Obviously that is a factor, that's really strong, and that can break through so many common walls in the tier. But the reason I think this is because in this generation it suddenly has access to Dragon Dance and Icicle Spear. So previously it really had no good, no reliable physical ice stab, and you could argue Icicle Spear isn't still reliable, and yeah, it's not the most reliable, but it definitely has its usages. It can be good for breaking through things like Focus Sashes, which can often be kind of more frail teams' only option for surviving absolutely offensive monsters like this. And it doesn't even care about Sturdy because it has Terra Vault, which is essentially a Mold Breaker clone. And what this lets us do is, because it also gets Fusion Bolt, which is just very strong. So this is essentially Bolt Beam coverage on something that has 170 base attack that also has access to a Dragon Dance, allowing it to increase its attack and speed a stage. And it's not the fastest thing in the tier, but it's fast enough that after a couple of Dragon Dances, there is very little going to be outspeeding this. So Bolt Beam coverage is fantastic. It's always been a sought after coverage pairing because it's just very, very good and hits most things in the game at least neutrally. So paired with Terra Vault, it can be really, really hard to tank this. You can no longer rely on things like Disguise from Mimikyu. You can't rely on Sturdy because it just ignores it because of Terra Vault. You can't rely on Thick Fat to absorb ice attacks or weaken ice attacks. You can't rely on Volt Absorb or Motor Drive to eat electric attacks. So I do think that Kyurem Black is insanely powerful. And on top of that, you can't even use something like Yachi Berry to eat ice attacks because only the first Icicle Spear will be weakened by the Yachi Berry, and the rest of them will be full power. So that's something to bear in mind. Now it can run things like Sub, for example, and due to its really good HP stat, it doesn't have to invest too much in HP to get the 404. And why 404 is so important, it puts your subs at 101 HP, meaning you guarantee survive for a Seismic Toss or a Nightshade, which are some kind of more slower defensive types. Only thing they can deal with these types, or these kind of threats, is to kind of try wall them out, but you can't really do that against Kyurem Black. Now, on top of this, on the Ice type, its defenses are pretty nice. I mean, you know already it has great HP, but this thing has access to team support in Aurora Veil, which is just fantastic. I think Aurora Veil is one of the best moves in the game. However, the only thing I think holding it back is the fact it's somewhat hard to set up because it has to be done through Hail, which won't be an issue for Ice types because you should be running Alolan Ninetales to get your Veil up in that regard. Item-wise, we can run Leftovers if you want the passive recovery, or Heavy Duty Boots if you're worried about entry hazards. So the Heavy Duty Boots let this thing constantly swap in on like Stealth Rocks and Spikes and Sticky Webs and stuff and just not care at all. So that's going to be really good for this thing to kind of come in and threaten things again in the late game. And on top of that, it's hard to put a status on this thing because it has access to Sub. So it can sub in the face of your Toxic or Will-O-Wisp, or you can't even rely on things like Cursed Body, Flame Body, Effect Spore, Static, things like that, because I'm 90% certain Terra Vault ignores those things. I'm not 100% certain, so do not quote me on that. I might be wrong, but last I checked, and if I remember correctly, it does ignore those abilities. So next up we have Melmetal. So my reasoning behind Melmetal is I think it's a bit non-competitive in the current tier it's in, because of its fantastic capability to be a good brawler with fantastic HP, attack, and defense. And what I mean by a good brawler is that it kind of is really good in one-on-one situations. Monotype is a one-on-one meta, so it's going to be really good in that regard. It has access to double Iron Bash, which hits twice, and I'm almost certain is boosted by Iron Fist as well, which is just crazy. This is a stab, double hitting move that's boosted by Iron Fist. And what this lets us do is use its fantastic attack stat to absolutely blow through so many walls in the tier, or just so many frailer Pokemon in the tier. Like, frail Pokemon honestly don't stand a chance against living against Metal. It's just not even a competition. Again, you can't rely on things like Sturdy or Focus Sash, because Metal does ignore those, because of double Iron Bash hits twice. It breaks through a substitute and then breaks through the actual Pokemon itself behind the substitute. So this thing is very scary, and it's not even remotely frail either. You might be thinking its special defense stat is not the best, and its speed stat's quite poor, but that doesn't matter too much because its HP is so astronomically high as long as its defense is. And it has great team support on its steel team. Again, Heatran is back now, so it's hard to just click special attacks and break it. The steel team has some great special walls like Corviknight, Celesteela, Ferrothorn. There's others, Bronzong, if you really want to use that for some reason. There are some good special defense walls on the tier, so they can be quite good for team support with Metal. On top of that, its item make can even run Assault Vest if you are worried about special attacks, so its special defense is fairly respectable at over 300 while still having the massive HP stat. And if you really want support for this, you can have like Wishpath Jirachi in the team to keep this thing topped up. So in that regard, I think it kind of forces a lot of types to have no check or counter to Metal. So you're just going to have to sack Pokemon to get a Pokemon in to counter this, in which Metal can just swap out into one of its counters or checks. So in that regard, I think it's a bit unhealthy for the meta. It promotes, in my opinion, a meta where weaker types are just going to have to force to be at a one Pokemon deficit every time basically Metal comes in on the field, which I just don't like for especially the weaker types. Next up we have Calyrex Ice. Now Calyrex's Ice stats right off the bat are quite honestly astronomical. Its attack stat is nearing that of Kyurem Black. Its speed stat is terrible, not terrible, but not great. And special attack has nothing to write home about. But where it really shines is it has disgustingly good defense and special defense. Now, much like Kyurem Black, this is really just compounded. This issue is compounded by the fact it can be paired with Aurora Veil on an Ice team. You might be thinking, okay, but its speed stat still isn't great. It's not going to be outspeeding much, but this thing gets access to Trick Room. Effectively making this thing fast for 5 turns. And coming off 165 base attack, this thing is just going to be hitting so hard. And we can easily run Adamant if we wanted to. We can invest the rest potentially in like HP or defense or special defense, depending on which stat you would prefer to wall out. And we can run Leftovers or Heavy Duty Boots. Now, its ability as one is a combination of Moxie and Unnerve. So this is pretty much the first ability where just strictly just combines 2 abilities. And I do think that's too good. While I think Unnerve is not the best, in my opinion, it definitely is somewhat effective on some types on the tier. There are some Pokemon who like to eat berries, like Azumarill, maybe like a berry with Endure Hawlucha, or maybe some Endure Select Berry Ultra Beasts. Just some examples of where berries could come in effect. So yeah, as I said, its defenses are compounded by the fact it just has access to Aurora Veil as team support, so these defenses are monstrously high. It's going to easily eat super effective hits, and while Psychic Ice is not the best defensive typing in the game, it is going to be hard to break because it's not quad weak to anything. On top of that, it has a new signature ability called Glacial Lance, and this is just kind of, to me, a bit indicative of why I'm not happy where the direction of the Pokemon DLC is going, because I just think it's power creep with regards to min-max stats and just ridiculous attacks. So Glacial Lance is 130 base, 100% accuracy, no added effects, hits adjacent foes. So basically what this means is it has no added effects, but it has no drawback. This is just a 130 base stab move coming off a 471 attack stat. And we already know Ice is one of the best offensive types in the game. It hits so many things super effectively, and it is walled up by a couple of types, but besides that, this thing is close combat for destroying like steel types who could wall it. It also gets Zen Headbutt for those fighting types in the tier, and actually Psychic is quite nice paired with Ice because it's neutral to fighting, which is nice on an Ice team. So I do think this thing is just a bit insane, in my opinion. Again, if you want to disagree with me, feel free to. But as I said, I'm kind of waffling a bit, so I'm sorry about that. But Glacial Lance is indicative of things like Rising Voltage or like Vicious Rend, where the move is just insanely powerful under fairly easy conditions, in my opinion, which I'm kind of disappointed with, because previously, if we wanted to run powerful moves, we had to run things like Blizzard, which is 110 base, but it has, you know, poor accuracy, for example, so that is the drawback to running these more powerful moves. But now, a lot of these Pokemon don't have to run these because it's just really strong, with no drawback. Now, I do forgive some of these Pokemon because they are mythical / legendaries, so I will forgive them with regards to being really powerful. I do think legendary Pokemon should be really powerful. It's interesting for the lore, it's interesting for just having those really powerful like boss Pokemon in game, but in my opinion, these sort of really powerful Pokemon don't belong in a tier like Monotype. So I'm going to pause there till we look at another team of Pokemon I'm kind of on the fence about, so I'll be right back. So next up we have some Pokemon I'm kind of on the fence about whether I think they belong in the tier or not. Partially due to lack of exposure to these, and partially due to me just not thinking they're insanely powerful, and maybe there is some workaround, like maybe banning some items like Terrain Extender, for example, maybe would weaken them. So first up we have Genesect. Now, I don't think in the long run Genesect will stay. Its stat spread isn't the most impressive right off the bat. It is kind of a bit balanced. It's decently speedy and decently offensive. Now, where I think Genesect kind of shines is ability Download, which lets us increase its attack or special attack based on the opponent's lower of the two defenses. So this can be quite nice because paired with Genesect's really good move pool, it gets access to Blaze Kick, Extreme Speed, U-Turn, Iron Head, and these are all kind of things on the physical side of Genesect. Gunk Shot as well, if you for some reason want to run that over Iron Head. I don't know why you would, but maybe you do. But that's not where it ends there. Genesect gets really good special moves too. We have Bug Buzz, we have Dark Pulse, Energy Ball for those ground types. We have Flamethrower, Flash Cannon, Giga for longevity, Ice Beam, Psychic, Thunderbolt, just to name a few. Like, a lot of those you wouldn't necessarily be using, but it just goes to show Genesect really does have a huge variety of move pool. And with Download, it can be quite offensive by just swapping in, and have decent speed too, especially if you want to run a Choice Scarf. So I do think Bug has definitely took a bit of a hit this DLC, so it is one of the reasons I maybe could see Genesect staying. And at the moment, I've had not too much issue with it, but that could be subject to change. But I don't really want to see Steel get anything more. It's kind of just, you know, the good tiers getting even more good tools, which I'm not exactly opposed to, but it definitely has a bigger power gap then between the weaker tiers and the weaker types and the stronger types. Next up we have Spectrier. So I'm not 100% sure I think of Spectrier. I think immediately, again, I'm disappointed because this just says, oh look, we just min-maxed Legendary crazy high. Like, this thing has really good speed and really good special attack, as well as having an amazing ability just being special Moxie. So what special Moxie does is, is every time it scores a KO, it increases its special attack, and its special attack is already quite high. So to me, this thing is, people are saying strictly it's a better Gengar or Blacephalon, and I'm not exactly in agreement with that, and some people disagree with that statement too, so I'm not saying everyone thinks that. I've just seen dissenting opinions, some saying, oh, it's just better than Blacephalon and Gengar. Some people are saying, no, it's not, and the reason people are on the side of no, it's not, is because its move pool is a move puddle. Let's look at its special attacks. It is absolutely god-awful. It gets Dark Pulse, Hex, Shadow Ball, pretty much are some of the only usable moves, and I guess you can run Swift or Hyper Beam or maybe Round if you want, Uproar, I guess. It's just, its move pool is bad. I'm not going to sugarcoat it, its move pool is bad. However, I do think it can be a bit problematic on neutral matchups. So say if the thing is running a Choice Scarf against, we'll say, electric type, fire type, water type, grass type, just things that don't typically run any immunity to ghost or would struggle to have these specially defensive walls to eat a ghost type, especially late in the game. This thing could just start clicking Shadow Ball and just snowballing into a really offensive threat, which I do think could be a bit problematic. And I'm not 100% sure on this. Maybe it's actually fine. I haven't had too much exposure to it yet, and when I was using it wasn't exactly overpowered, but it's just something that I'm slightly wary about. Now next up we have Regieleki, and I gave out to Spectre for having a bad move pool, but Regieleki takes the cake. So Regieleki has an awful move pool, having basically only access to normal and electric moves. People are even running Ancient Power just because it's one of the only non-water or electric moves, non-water or normal moves it gets, which is kind of sad if you ask me. Now, why I'm actually on the list of things I could potentially see being banned, or I potentially want to be banned, is because its ability Transistor. This Pokemon's attacking stat is multiplied by 1.5 while using an electric type attack. So its attack, special attack, or attack aren't exactly amazing, but that essentially gives it a free specs or free band without having to be choice locked. And we already saw how good Guerrilla Tactics was on things like Darmanitan, and Darmanitan was choice locked into its moves. Now granted, this thing only gets the boost from electric moves, but as we've seen, it basically only gets electric moves. So I see a problem with that. Now on top of that, its speed is absolutely ridiculous. It is the highest in the game by a significant margin. I can't remember how much Deoxys speed has, he's not in this tier so I can't check, but I know it is higher than Deoxys speed, and significantly higher too. So if we run, for example, a Naive Nature, we have 548 speed. That is so insanely fast, and it even outspeeds things that are base 350 and Scarfed. So things like Gengar, outsped. It's just so fast. Now what this thing can do and why I think it could be problematic, it gets Volt Switch, Rising Voltage. We can get Rapid Spin if you want that team support on the electric type. It can easily run Dual Screen because I do believe it gets the Light Screen, and Reflect, and it can run things like Explosion as well. And why I said Explosion is just, if you're against Mono around, just boom in their face and hopefully take down or do some good damage to your opponent. Now this thing is absolutely and blatantly walled out by, actually sorry, I forgot to say, it got Cage, what's it called? Thunder Cage, which is basically a trapping move similar to Fire Spin or Magma Storm, I think that's what it's called, so why I think this thing could be problematic, its Rising Voltage is honestly just obnoxious. It's just so strong. And again, it's kind of indicative of what I said earlier about how I think the disparity in moves is becoming massive. I think offensive moves are becoming way too strong, and because of that, I'm going to go on a slight tangent here. I think defensive types or defensive Pokemon in general are just getting a bit worse in favor of hyper offensive legendaries, and it's not something I'm too keen on seeing. I'm not saying the meta should be stall heavy. When I say defensive, a lot of people think, oh, you like stall. I'm not saying stall. Stall is a legitimate tactic, not one I enjoy, but it is a legitimate tactic. Though I think with these new attacks just becoming stupidly high base powers, it just gets a bit boring for me. It's just click buttons and win. Now this thing is completely walled up by ground types, as I said. But the electric type struggles with ground types in general, so I don't see a reason for this not to have Regieleki on the electric team, because it just blows away so many other types. So back to the topic on hand, Rising Voltage. So Rising Voltage looks kind of weak, it's only 70 base power, it's not that strong. But we have to bear in mind, in electric terrain this doubles. If your opponent is grounded, it doubles to 140 base, and then it's powered up by electric terrain by 1.3 times anyway, and then it's powered up by Stab, and then it's powered up by Transistor. So this thing's Rising Voltage just absolutely blows away things, especially if you're using, for example, Specs. It can easily one-hit KO things like Dragon Ball. I think that Dragon Ball's not that defensive, that's not impressive. Sure, it's not defensive, but it still resists and absolutely blows it away, doing an easy 100% to Dragon Ball while it's in electric terrain, which is crazy for a resist. It can do upwards of 90%, I believe, against things like Kyurem Black, which is super strong because that is a resist, and it is a bulky resist as well. If you don't have a ground type, if you don't have a Levitator who resists, So most things that are neutral to Regieleki are just going to get absolutely blown away by Rising Voltage. And I believe there are going to be some weaker types who just won't have an answer to this, or it's going to force you to run things like, Crocodile, or force you to run like Lightning Rod Marowak and a Fire Team or a Ghost Team, and in my opinion that's just a bit boring to me. I'm not keen on a Pokemon that kind of forces so many types to run a very specific counter, lest you just be completely blown away. So I do think Regieleki could be a bit problematic. Next up we have Blaziken. So Blaziken is a Pokemon who is very always traditionally banned because Speed Boost is really, really good. So Speed Boost allows it to patch up its mediocre speed by getting a speed stage every turn, and it already has pretty good physical attack at 120, and this can be ran alongside like Adamant because we don't necessarily need that speed to outspeed. We don't need these plus speed nature to outspeed things because we are getting a stage of speed at the end of every turn, which is crazy good. It can be paired with things like Sword Dance or Protect if you want to guarantee get that speed boost off. We have like Flare Blitz, we have Close Combat now. I think it gets U-Turn, it gets Earthquake, it gets Knockoff, so its move pool is quite nice, and I could definitely see this thing being a bit problematic. Just being able to blow back a lot of kind of slower or frailer types. Not slow frail types, obviously a slow frail type is just kind of poor, but like slower types or frailer types, hyper offensive types, Blaziken can just outspeed them after a couple of attacks and just blow its way through with it. Now the reason I think it mightn't be immediately problematic is because Flare Blitz does have harsh recoil, and things like Close Combat does weaken your defenses, making this thing much more susceptible to priority, for example. So it's not a thing I think should be immediately banned, but it is a thing I have on my watch list. And finally, a Pheromosa. So again, Pheromosa, right off the bat when I was using it, it wasn't too OP, but I could steal some games with Pheromosa just by having crazy good stats. Its speed tier is phenomenal, as well as having great special attack and attack, depending on which you want to go into. Now, granted, its defenses are absolutely dire. They're basically non-existent. 37, 37, and 71 is not good, and this thing is super frail and going to be blown away by most priority or anything that outspeeds it. However, its move pool is great. It gets Rapid Spin if you want to increase your speed stage, especially on like a weakened Pokemon who is low on HP, for example. Even if you're only running for attack EVs, that's still a nice 311 attack coming off 50 base. That can just do a bit of chip to finish off an opponent. And what that lets you do is increase your speed stage because of Rapid Spin. It'll also increase your special attack stage because your Beast Boost will let you get a special attack stage, and then suddenly you can abuse things like Ice Beam, Bug Buzz, Focus Blast. Now this thing is completely walled out by a lot of ghosts like Aegislash, so it is also walled out by some special walls, so it's the reason I didn't immediately put it up in my ban list, but I think it's kind of on the watch list because I do think it could be a little problematic. As well as that, if you want to run physical attacks, you can run Close Combat, U-Turn, Drill Run, Facade if you're worried about being burned, for example. Poison Jab for fairies in the tier. It gets Triple Axle now, which is really good for breaking sashes and just like blowing through things like dragons, flying types, both of which kind of give Bug and Fighting some trouble. So I do think Pheromosa could be maybe potentially a little good when I have more exposure to it. I actually forgot one Pokemon here, Naganadel. I love Poison type, it's one of my favourite types in the game, but I have to admit Naganadel could be a bit too good. Its offensive stats are fantastic. It can run a plus speed nature, a jolly nature, timid nature with a nasty plot, for example. And if it swaps in a Pokemon that can't immediately KO, they can collect Nasty Plot. Suddenly, this thing has over 700 special attack, and it has some nice moves in like Sludge Bomb, Sludge Wave, even if you want to run a bit more powerful moves, and maybe Dragon Pulse because I don't want to lose the special attack with Draco Meteor, and then Flamethrower for those Steel types. So usually dragons can be walled out by fairies, but that's not so easy because it has Sludge Wave, and even Steel types can't wall out because it's Flamethrower. So this thing can be very, very strong and just become very fast and just snowball really hard quite quickly. So I do think this thing could potentially be an issue. It also gets things like Spikes, I believe, and Toxic Spikes, which could be really good in the Dragon matchup. And with Poison's fantastic defensive core of like Ferrothorn and Mungus, the Slow Brothers, I do think it could be quite scary to deal with. Now, these things are Pokemon I'm not 100% sure on. I'm not going to say these need to be banned immediately. They're just things that I'm kind of on the fence about right now. Probably going to be verging on the side of ban, because I'm a bit more conservative with my ban lists. I like things to be a bit less powerful across the board, so more types have the chance to shine. So that's going to be it from my list of Pokemon that I find problematic right now. However, this is open for discussion. Let me know if you disagree with me. I'm definitely interested to hear what you have to say. And on that, kind of a TLD or TLDW, if you not want to watch the whole video, I'll leave this timestamp below if you want to have a conclusion on my thoughts on the meta right now. So my thoughts right now are, I think it's heavily influenced and heavily in favor of offensive. And maybe people like playing offensive, and that's okay. I like a balance where teams can be defensive or offensive. I'm not a fan of stall, but it's a legitimate tactic. I think a lot of these new legendaries, a lot of these Pokemon are just kind of silly and min-maxed, in my opinion. Like, they have crazy high special attack or crazy high attack. So I do think that's a bit problematic, in my opinion, because it makes defensive Pokemon a little bit less good. And I do think some types that don't have those super offensive types, like the more defensive types, are going to struggle to keep up in the meta, which I find a bit unfortunate. On top of that, I think new attacks are just getting a bit silly. Things like Rising Voltage, things like Vicious Rend, Glacial Lance, which is okay because it's a signature move, I suppose, are just becoming more and more powerful with less and less drawbacks. So I find just the power levels are increasing rapidly, which I'm not a personal fan of. I think for me, the balance philosophy in monotypes should be more so not balance around the top tiers, or not necessarily balance on the bottom tiers, but try and balance it so that no type is just completely blown out of the water. Like, this type has no hope in the meta, or this type has just so many losing matchups. I understand that some types are going to have losing matchups. That's just the way this tier is balanced, and that's okay. But I think if there's a Pokemon that completely invalidates like so many types, like there's a one Pokemon like maybe Magearna, where there's a type or a few types that they just literally can't win. There's nothing they can do against Magearna, or they have to balance their team so specifically to counter something like Magearna. I think that's how a meta starts to get unhealthy, and we start seeing less variety in types, less variety in teams, because there'd be no reason not to run these super powerful Pokemon. Now, I don't have an exact solution of how to balance the tier besides just banning everything, which is not necessarily a good thing either. There are some items you have to look at yet, like Damp Rock, Terrain Extender, which maybe we should look at more closely and see if they're going to be problematic. So there is actually a couple of Pokemon I forgot to mention here, like Urshifu, who at the moment I have no issue with, but I maybe will discuss that in a later video. So there are definitely a few Pokemon I forgot. If I did, apologies for that. This is kind of just a quick video to get my thoughts out about the meta right now. So that's going to be it for today. If you want to discuss this, definitely leave a comment. You can join the Discord, so link down below. I have plenty of discussions over there with some of the community, and we don't always agree, and that's completely okay. I'm completely up for that discussion, so definitely come along and join if you want to do that. As for videos coming out, I will be doing some Monotype showcases in a few weeks, hopefully when the meta settles. In between that, I'll be doing probably a good few meta discussions when Pokemon get banned, and I will be going into more detail about the new Pokemon who I think will definitely remain in the tier, like the birds, and what role they have to play in the meta. So I'll hopefully have that up sometime next week. So thank you for watching if you did watch this far, and again, feel free to join the Discord to discuss this with me. I hope you have a good day. Take care.